G'day guys, and today it's time for another Australian focused coronavirus update. Now it's been a little bit since my last update and a lot has begun to happen since then. As I mentioned in my last video, native transmission has begun within Australia. We are seeing Australian citizens, people within country infecting each other rather than just having people stepping off the plane and developing symptoms. As such, the number of new cases, the rate of infection and the rate of growth of infection is dramatically increasing. The number of confirmed cases stands at currently 367, with thankfully only a handful of deaths so far, mainly stemming from a retirement village that was infected, and obviously those people being of older age, very vulnerable to this sort of disease. Something to keep in mind, as I always remind people, is that this is only confirmed cases, and as of now, Australia has the resources, the time to actually run around testing everyone who needs to be tested. But as we're seeing in other countries such as certainly Italy, China, it gets to the point where there's simply not enough time in the day to test everyone who's potentially infected. You run out of test kits, and as such, the number of confirmed cases seems to slide off. But in fact, there's more cases than ever before. You simply do not have the time and resources to test everyone. So that is something will be hopefully not happening to us in the coming weeks and months. But unfortunately, it may be that case. You'll remember, just a few weeks ago, the US was standing at around similar levels to Australia, and now they have themselves many thousands of cases. So we could expect to see a dramatic increase, an exponential increase in the number of cases within Australia over the next coming weeks. And there's obviously been a roll-on effect into the economy and culture and that sort of thing. Obviously, the big talking point at the moment is the economy, because people are worried about lots of things. Casual workers, because they don't have any sort of sick leave, what's going to be done for them if they have to take time off work, and this sort of thing. There's been lots of government decisions, rebates, money, and this sort of thing. Again, just looking from a libertarian perspective, maybe people wouldn't have to worry about taking time off work if they had a bit more money, if the government didn't tax them so much. But it appears that's not up for discussion. Something we're beginning to see is schools, unis, and this sort of thing beginning to close. With the recent development of a case near me, the local university, the University of Wollongong, has decided it will be shutting its doors. We will not be having classes in person as of next week, and you'll have to learn online and that sort of thing. Various schools in Sydney are being closed based on proximity of cases and this sort of thing. The University of Queensland has also closed. Gatherings of over 500 people have been banned, so you have things like sports matches, the rugby season has begun, music festivals are being cancelled because it's theorised, and correctly theorised, that if you get that many people together, there is a significant chance that at least one of them will be infected with the coronavirus, whether they know it or not. Because again, something to keep in mind is that coronavirus can be asymptomatic yet still transmissible for up to 2 weeks, so you can be wandering around, you've got no symptoms whatsoever, but you're still infecting people. And again, even when you begin to develop symptoms, I believe people will be a lot more sensitive to this now and be more willing to test themselves. But again, there may be those people who say, look, it's just the sniffles, I'm not going to bother to get tested, and this sort of thing. And that's where this huge discrepancy between the number of confirmed cases and the number of cases in actuality is, because as we go through these cycles of incubation periods, there'll be massive spikes in the numbers. And as I mentioned before, the US was standing at 300 numbers recently, a few weeks ago, and now they're at 3,700. So Australia will be getting up to this level. Thankfully, not as rapidly as, say, Europe, because Europe is obviously very hyper-connected. Indeed, it has open borders, so any attempt at quarantine was effectively impossible. Very interconnected, more urban dense populations, so they've seen a massive increase in the rate of infection there. Many thousands of cases. Italy, in particular, Milan being placed into lockdown. And we'll begin to see this type of thing in Australia over the next coming weeks. An exact number I cannot give you because I'm not an expert in this sort of thing, but already we're beginning to see the effects as panic sets in. Again, initially it was reported as sort of an interesting bit of trivia, humorous aside, look at these ridiculous people collecting and hoarding toilet paper and this sort of thing, but no one's really laughing now because the shortages have begun to increase in scope, at least in my local area. I don't know about yours, I don't speak for the whole country. I've seen shortages in essentially goods that aren't going to go off, your pasta, your baked beans, your tin goods, that sort of thing. Obviously there's no toilet paper in sight whatsoever, but the shortages have begun to increase in scope as people realize that they may need to effectively hunker in their homes for upwards of a month, because obviously we're being bombarded with images from the media of people in Italy Terrible, terrible images of people having to line up for hours, massive amounts of congestion, shopping centres and this sort of thing. And this is obviously a dangerous situation to be in. We've also seen videos of people getting into fights over the last bag of rice and this sort of thing, which is why I've always advised anyone watching this to prep up in advance. Unfortunately, as of this point in time, I'm sorry to say, it is too late. You've left it too late to prep, and there's precious little you can do because at least one of the big chain supermarkets in Australia, known as Coles, is saying, look, we're no longer going to do home deliveries except for the elderly and the disabled. And some prioritization is being given to those people. They're saying, look, they're going to have this specific hour in the morning where only these people can come in. They're attempting to look after that more vulnerable section of society and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, if you did not hear my advice, it is now too late to stock up, and you may be in for a very uncomfortable time. You're probably not going to die. You may just have to have some decently strict rationing and with your own household if we do get to that stage where we will be quarantined within our own homes, as we're seeing in China and Italy and this sort of thing. And I believe that sort of thing will occur. There's no containment. How do you contain a disease that's essentially invisible for up to 2 weeks and incredibly infectious? You can't see it coming. There's no containment whatsoever within Australia, so I would expect to see, as I've said before, a massive increase in the number of cases over the next coming weeks. We will hit thousands and thousands of cases, and it may be necessary to ban almost all sort of public interaction. People may be advised to self-isolate on a mass scale, lockdowns and this sort of thing, as we're seeing in Europe, and this sort of thing. Interesting bit of trivia is that the Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton has tested positive for coronavirus. Perhaps on a more negative note, he had actually met with the Prime Minister and other members of the Australian Cabinet, as well as US officials whilst on a state visit. Now, I imagine all these people have been immediately tested, and you would think we'd know about it if our Prime Minister Scott Morrison had been infected with coronavirus, but it would bear well in mind to think the fact that they might hide this from us to obviously keep up morale and this sort of thing. It would be interesting to see just the impact, of a world leader having this disease, what that would do to sort of worldwide morale and this sort of thing. So there's lots of issues arising with this coronavirus. Personally, in my own manufacturing section of the economy, we've seen blockages, issues with steel supply and this sort of thing. The price of steel has increased. Apparently, the foundries and smelters in China are being shut down. The air quality has remarkably improved, which is interesting. But yeah, massive roll-on effects to the economy, massive roll-on effects to education as schools are shut down. Obviously, tourism is a big part of an Australian economy, and the big piece of news from today is that anyone who's arriving in Australia has basically been told you need to self-isolate for 14 days upon arrival. There were measures that were used in the past, these temperature guns, which were utterly useless. They didn't even work half the time, and this sort of thing. So now we're just being told, look, if you arrive here, you just need to self-isolate because we need to attempt to curb the spread of infection, and it's not enough to randomly shoot someone with a temperature gun because it doesn't work. So that's the big news of the day. Whether this will have an effect, obviously it's not going to stop the virus, but it should help slow down the infection, because obviously we're taking people who are just get off the boat, get off the plane, and allowed to wander around wherever they may please. Now they're being told to self-isolate. Hopefully anyone who is arriving from an infected area, or they've been infected and they don't know about it, this will help slow the spread of infection, but again, it's not going to stop it. There is no containment on coronavirus whatsoever. Do expect the situation to get worse. If you can prep in any meaningful way, you're pretty much out of time because the shelves are pretty bare, at least where I live, but you should absolutely be doing everything you can now. Now is the time to panic. It's not something I would particularly recommend all the time, but I think a certain degree of neuroticism is in order if you haven't already prepped, if you didn't take it seriously, or you just were worried about being ostracized by your friends and this sort of thing. And look, people do give you strange looks when you tell them you're prepping. I prepped all the way back up in February, and I was chatting to my gym buddy, and he sort of gave me a sideways look about it, and I asked him about it today, and he said, look man, you were right, and I was right. And I think a lot of people around the world are patting themselves on the back and thanking people for advising them to prep, because they've just saved themselves a lot of hardship in the future. So yes, this is the situation as it stands in Australia. We have over 300 confirmed cases. Again, there's lots more that we just don't know about. 14 days of self-isolation has been imposed on new arrivals. This will obviously have a massive roll-on effect to Australia's tourism industry. Additionally, there are more problems in the economy, issues with casual workers, issues with lots of hospital staff having to take time off work as they self-isolate and this sort of thing. We have schools closing down, unis closing down, gatherings of over 500 people have been banned. Shortages are increasing in scope, and we have at least one member of cabinet testing positive for coronavirus. There's celebrities and things being infected, but that's not something I particularly care about talking. The only interesting thing to point out with celebrities is obviously people want to get up close and take photos with them and that sort of thing, and I believe some people took photos with Tom Hanks, and they're under investigation and testing for coronavirus and this sort of thing. So yeah, this is the situation as it stands in Australia. I would expect it to get a lot worse in terms of the scale of the infection within Australia. I will keep reporting on this, as many other people are. Take care, stay healthy, eat your vitamin C, get your vitamin D, and prepare to self-isolate. This will be an interesting period of history within Australia. So thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.